Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Sue Langley, a leading voice in positive psychology, emotional intelligence, neuroscience, and someone who's spent many years helping people understand what it really truly means to flourish. Sue is the CEO and founder of the Langley Group, where she works with leaders, coaches, and organisations to bring the science of human flourishing into everyday practice. She's a speaker, master trainer, global consultant, and researcher, and she's known for making the complex science practical, accessible, and useful for real people and workplaces. She's also created the world's first government-accredited diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing, and has a master's of neuroscience. Sue actually lives down the road from me, and we'd met a couple of times, but I had the opportunity to go for a lovely beach walk with her a few weeks ago. So I'm really excited to have Sue on the Thriving Leader podcast. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't know if I would want to be walking on the beach this morning.
I know. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning here, and it looks like it's going into the evening because there's just so much rain and it's so dark outside. So yeah, let's hear a bit about your story. So for the people who may be new to your work, how do you describe what you do and why it matters?
It's a really good question. And to be honest, even though I've almost been in business now 25 years and I was taught early on, you should get your elevator pitch right. I have no idea how to say what I do. Sometimes I say I get paid to talk for a living. But I guess what I really do is, my belief is I'm all about how do I make a positive difference to global human flourishing? Somehow, how do I do that? My personal purpose in life has always been how do I breathe spirit into the minds of others to achieve their level of excellence, whatever it is for them, whether it's an individual, team or organization. It's how do I inspire people and equip people to be able to do what they do to the best of their ability. That's what I do, I suppose, or that's what I aim to do. And I like to do it through the science. So the science of emotions, the science of human flourishing, what positive psychology is all about is the scientific study of human flourishing. And then I always put the neuroscience behind it, because I don't believe you can really understand how emotions work and how well-being works unless you actually understand what's happening in the brain and in the body. And so I tend to bring in things like genetics, epigenetics, neurobiology. I bring in the microbiome and what that happens. And then I sort of look at it from a systemic perspective. But everything I do is always based on science.
Oh, I love it. We're going to have to dig deep into a few things. Even in the last 24 hours of travel, I've had these reflections about a few things, and I'm keen to kind of unpack some of those. So I'm curious, like, how did you work out what your purpose was? Was there a journey that you went on, or is it a light bulb moment for you? How did you kind of come to this conclusion of what your
it's interesting, actually. I reflected on it. I know this is going to sound really bad, but I reflected on it in 1991. I wrote down, my purpose is to breathe spirit into the minds of others to achieve their level of excellence. And I wasn't even close to doing what I'm doing now. But for me, it was really about how do I want to show up every day? I got really clear on my purpose, my vision, my values, and I've kind of stuck with that. And my individual purpose hasn't really changed since 1991. I don't know, maybe I sort of started thinking about this early on. It was just what was important to me. And I suppose the thing for me about a purpose, and people use the terminology purpose, mission, vision, things interchangeably. But for me, a purpose I like to breathe spirit into the minds of others to achieve their level of excellence, is I could do that in a conversation with a child. I could do it in a training program with a senior leadership group. I could do it in a coaching conversation. Maybe I can do it on a podcast. Who knows? That remains to be seen. But it's about then how am I showing up in that moment to be able to support people and do that. And then it was really about learning lots of research and science and stuff like that.
I can't wait to dig into some of the research and science. One of the things I was reflecting on, I was at the airport on Monday, and I had my umbrella on the desk and my keep cup and my water bottle, and they were all the same color. And they were like this light sage color. And I had this reflection of, oh, like I would, if someone asked me, what's your favorite color? I would say yellow or blue, because yellow reminds me of the sunshine and blue reminds me of swimming in the ocean. But clearly from someone from the outside looking at me, they'll be like, she really likes this color sage, because all of my things were sage. And it got me thinking about some of the stories that we tell ourselves. Like we get very habitual with patterns of thinking. So for example, I'm used to saying that my favorite color is yellow, or someone says, how are you? You say good, even though you don't really think you're good.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking about like the stories we tell ourselves and how sometimes we can create blind spots because we're so used to actually not deeply reflecting, and how I'm just curious about some of the neuroscience about that habitual thinking versus we've actually changed over time, and we actually need to kind of reauthor some of the stories we tell ourselves too.
Yeah.
Is there much research and neuroscience around that?
Yeah, one of the things I think is really interesting from a neuroscience perspective is if you think about neural pathways, the way I often describe it is if you imagine the palm of my hand is a neuron, and then we have pokey bits, which are axons or dendrites that allow one neuron to talk to another. The more I run down a pathway, if you like, the stronger it gets. But often when we're thinking about habits, and there are some great books written about habits, I'm sure some of your listeners have read, they're often talking about behavioural habits. I like to remind people from a neuroscience perspective, those habits could be habits of behaviour, habits of thought, habits of emotion. So to your point, the thoughts that go round and round in our head every day, it's potentially the same thought that we have. So yeah, we might be still saying something we said 20 years ago in our head about my favorite color is, or whatever it might be. Have we actually stopped to think of what's being displayed by us compared to what's going on in our head? I don't know what your favorite color is. That's entirely up to you. But if we think about habits, one of the things that I think is interesting about habits is sometimes habits can serve us really well. Because if they are good for our well-being, if we put them in place because they support us, it means they can be done just over and over and over again without our brain sort of draining much fuel or using many neurotransmitters, if you like, which frees us up to keep that fuel, that brain fuel, for the good stuff, the stuff we really want to work with. So sometimes habits can be really useful, but to your point is we want to stop and actually evaluate, is this habit serving me right now, whether it's a habit of behavior, habits of thought, habits of emotion.
Yeah. So how do we identify some of these unhelpful habits versus helpful ones? Like, is there ways to do this?
Yeah, the thing I always ask myself is this good for my well-being? So to your point, in the moment, scrolling through social media for 45 minutes might be something that you do because you can rationalize, well, I did it because, I need to check this, I need to do that, whatever but ask yourself long term, is it good for my well-being? And my guess is, you said, you went to the lighthouse walk. My guess is that's good for your well-being. You didn't just do it for exercise, but there's a long-term benefit of those sorts of things that happens over time. And we might get into a lot of habits that become very addictive to us in a variety of different ways. I don't know, binge watching Netflix or whatever it happens to be. But we might find, and again, thought patterns, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, etc. It's stopping and asking ourselves, is this actually serving me right now? And if it's not, what can I do to change it? And I love the science around habits, because if you look at the science, it gives us clues on how to change it. Do you change the cue? Do you change the habit? Do you change the reward? Well, whichever one you change, you've got 3 different options of where you intervene in a habit cycle to try and shift things. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it actually is simple. And this is the thing I love about the science, is knowing the science doesn't necessarily make it easy, but it does make it simple.
Yeah. It's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I was really tired, and I realized that the 2 nights before, at about 9 o'clock, I picked up my phone and started scrolling, and then went to bed at 10 o'clock. And I was like, had this moment of like, oh no, I'm that person that they talk about. It's got this scrolling addiction. But, I like realized that unhelpful habit. What's really interesting is the other day, obviously I was scrolling again, but I saw this video that talked about the fact that doing exercise in the morning is when your brain's at its sharpest, and whether that's the best time for us to exercise. And I've got a habit, ritual, whatever you want to call, that I like to either go to the gym or do a walk in the morning, because I know it makes me feel so much better for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Whereas what it was actually saying was that's actually really powerful thinking time early in the morning, and maybe at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon is a better time to do your exercise, because that's when our brain's probably switching off. So what actually, like, obviously most of this research probably done on neurotypical people, I'm assuming, as well. So there's probably some variance as well. But what does the neuroscience tell us about when our brain is at its sharpest and when we should do certain things versus other things?
Yeah, look, I think that's an interesting one. And I think what's important is we are all potentially different. So if you think about in the positive psychology realm, there's lots of research that will say mindfulness works. And there might be a population of people that it works for, but you tend to hear the research studies of when there's a control group and experimental group, and the experimental group improves, yay, well, we should all now practice mindfulness. But we don't tend to hear about the studies where there's a control group and experimental group where there's no difference at the end of it, because nobody knows those. So if you think about mindfulness, mindfulness can be a great strategy, but it doesn't actually work for everybody because some people don't enjoy doing it, or there's 20 different versions of mindfulness you can do. And some people really like walking mindfulness and some people can't stand it. Some people like open eye mindfulness and some people can't stand it. It's kind of a bit like that with exercise. Is often one of the reasons to do it in the morning, regardless of what's going on in your brain, is because in the morning you get it done, you've ticked it off, and then you get on with your day. If you don't do it in the morning, chances are by the time you get to 2:30 in the afternoon, you're engrossed in what you're doing, etc. And all of a sudden it's got to 6 p.m. and didn't do it. Personally, I'd rather you go, do you know what, do it in the morning and get it done than skip it because other things happen, whether people have got to pick kids up or they've got to get home from work, the rain gets in the way, I don't know, whatever it is. If you think about, though, what works for you. So if you are somebody that needs to do deep thinking and you feel at your best in the morning, then go for it. But then set an alarm or something to get your butt out to go and do what you need to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's really difficult to, whether somebody is neurotypical or neurodiverse or whatever we are all on a spectrum somewhere, if you like, as far as, if you think of a dimension, we're all on there somewhere. And it's actually stopping and evaluating what's better for you. Like I know myself, if I go in the morning, I get it done. If I don't go in the morning, it's a lot less likely to happen. It might happen, but my exercise is a lot less likely to happen.
I have a lot more excuses, like if it's an afternoon thing of, I'm too tired. Oh, no, I should hang out with the kids. Oh, no, there's just too many excuses. Morning, done, haven't even thought about it, and it's over.
But then I think of my other half, he never wants to exercise in the morning. There's no way he's going to exercise in the morning. So he'll often book a training session or go to the gym or something at like 3:00 in the afternoon. I can't think of anything worse. That's when I'm kind of engrossed in things and I'm doing stuff and whatever but for him that works. So yeah, I think it's find what works for you, but most importantly, find it. And I remember going back to the mindfulness thing, there was an interview with the Dalai Lama and somebody said, what is the best type of mindfulness? And he just said, the one that you'll do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that with exercise, isn't it? It's morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it's the one that you'll do.
Yeah. So most of our audiences are leaders, or they might be people in culture professionals.
Yeah.
And what are you observing in workplaces right now? What are leaders struggling with most?
Yeah, look, I think that's an interesting one. And I think sometimes what we think we're struggling with may not be what we're actually struggling with. So a lot of people have said to me at one point of like, I feel overwhelmed with AI. I feel I want to learn to use it and I should be using it better and I don't and I should be, etc. Or people get worried about leaders now from a psychosocial risks and hazards perspective. Leaders are responsible for the well-being of their people. That's a whole added layer and nobody teaches you that as a leader often. So I think there's a lot of pressure on leaders now outside of the traditional style of leadership. So the traditional leadership is, and I'm not talking traditional as in 100 years ago, but even traditional up until recently, is your job as a leader is to get a whole bunch of people to get stuff done. But there's a lot more pressure now on leaders to, yes, get stuff done and care for your people. Now, the funny thing is leaders have often cared for their people. I don't know many leaders, if I say, who cares about their people, are going to go, no, I don't. We do care. But often, even in leadership programs, we're not teaching that. Now, I've been lucky enough to be in this sort of EI POS-psych space for 25 years. And my leadership programs, I know, don't appeal to many people. In fact, they appeal to lots of people once they're on them. But I remember a organization, they asked us to pitch for doing their leadership development. And I knew one of the sort of the people and culture people. And at the end of it, she said, actually, we're going to go with somebody else who's going to do the more traditional leader 101, leader, manager, blah, 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 because we don't think our people are ready for your leadership development. And I'm like, oh my God, if you're starting with Leader 101, why wouldn't you just start with the good stuff, the stuff that really...
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So I think because on paper, what we talk about with positive leadership and whatever people think it's about, oh, happy clappy and all this sort of stuff, and it's really not. It's about looking not just here's a 4-step decision making model, here's a strategic planning and execution model. We don't do that, and I make no bones about that fact that we do not do that, and that's fine. It needs to be done. What we focus on is the psychology of leadership, the psychology of people, how to coach with the brain in mind, what is the importance of that, how to look after the well-being of yourself and your people, etc. Yes, you've got these models, which is great, and there are many organizations that teach all that stuff really well, and it's important. But what I know is you can know the best 4-step decision-making model, but if you are in a grumpy, miserable, negative, stressed out mood, you're not using it.
Yeah, 100%. So I do want to pick up on the coaching for well-being, as well as actually understand, like, both of those things I'm quite interested in. But you said something earlier about what made me think about how people assume when they hear positive psychology, it means you have to be positive all the time. Like, there's a little bit of a misconception of what you're like. I'm selling people being happy, or, I'm teaching them how to be happy all the time. What do you wish leaders actually understood about the positive psychology movement and what it actually is about?
Yeah, I think for me is if you actually look at the definition, it tells you what it's about. So if you think about positive psychology as a overarching framework or ethos or whatever positive psychology is the scientific study of human flourishing. That's it. It's the scientific study of human flourishing. Within positive psychology, you've got positive organizational scholarship that looks at the scientific study of organizational flourishing. You've got positive leadership within that, which is the scientific study of leadership within those organizations. So the thing that I think is really important to understand is positive psychology is the scientific study of human flourishing. How we bring that about might be different in communities, in education, etc., etc. But it's still about how do we get the best out of people. And the thing that I love now is we've got so much research and science, whether it's across countries, whether it's across teams, etc. Jan-Emmanuel Deneuve and George Ward did this amazing study, and they wrote a book that they said is the book that should never have needed to be written, which is basically the ROI of why organizations, if you look after the well-being of your people, you get more results. And the thing that I think is absolutely fantastic that they did is they used British Telecom as their guinea pig and people on phones making sales. And all they did is every day, those people had to rate how happy they were. So their individual well-being day to day, and then they looked at sales. Now, one of the things that was interesting, it wasn't that they found that 10 people were happier and they made more sales and 10 people were really miserable and didn't make any. It was on the days you were happy, you made more sales. On the days you were stressed and overwhelmed and whatever, you didn't make as many sales. And this is one of the things I say all the time. Every single employee has the ability to be a good employee, a great employee, and a poor employee, depending on how we're feeling. So if I don't have the skills to manage my emotions, to handle my well-being, to look after myself when times get challenging, to acknowledge that I am not in the best space to make a great decision right now because of all of this stuff that's going on in my world. If I don't have the skills to do that, I'm just going to keep powering through and wonder why I'm not making the sales. I'm making poor choices. My well-being is taking a dive, etc. So that's why I teach emotions. I don't just teach positive psychology. I teach the science of emotions. I teach people. I mean, I did a whole day in Sydney. I was in Sydney earlier this week. Yes, earlier this week as well. And I had this whole day just teaching people about emotions and how they work, etc. Because emotions underpin every single thing that we do.
I think it's so critical. Even one of I use a personality profiling tool called Facet 5, and one of the facets is emotionality because it's based on the Big Five theory of personality. But so many personality diagnostics just look at the other four and they miss emotionality, which influences everything else. And obviously there's an innate emotionality, but then it's also how we feel day to day and context and everything that's actually happening around us too. So I think it's such a important skill even to be developing in our kids, let alone in the workplace.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that is interesting for me, and it was only a small study done a few years ago, but I think it was quite a cool one because they got people to do the Mesquite test, which is the only abilities-based test of EI. So the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, shortened to Mesquite. And then they put people under fMRI scanners and watched what happened in their brain while they had to wrangle with social and emotional problems. So all of us every day, whether you've got kids, whether you haven't, whether you've got friends, whether you haven't, whether you've got team, whether you haven't, whatever, we all have to deal with emotional and social problems all day, every day. And one of the things that they found at the end of it is pretty much every person got to the best or correct, in quotation marks, correct answer, as in the better answer. But here's the interesting thing is those with higher EI got there faster and used less effort, less activity in the prefrontal cortex in a particular area. So what I took away from that I keep in my mind is if my emotional intelligence is higher, I will get there faster. Now, if you think about what that means, you mentioned earlier about, if you spend time with your kids, etc. Let's imagine that you are in a sort of stressed, pressured mood because you've got a lot on your plate, etc. You're busy working away from home and you haven't noticed, because your emotional intelligence is low, you haven't noticed that you're actually sitting there sort of jamming your keyboard a bit harder and, trying to get through things. You're not thinking as clearly and your poor little brain is running low on dopamine, etc. But you haven't really noticed because you've got to power through and you've got to get it done. And one of your kids comes running in with some exciting news and goes, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, I don't have time, I'm on a call, go. And then about an hour later, when you're off the call, etc., you suddenly come down off your little stressed moment and you realize that you've really hurt the feelings of your child because they had some really exciting news and you slammed them and shut them down. You've now got to repair that. You've got to go and check in with them and are they okay? And mummy didn't mean it and blah, blah, blah. I was just in the middle of this and explain, etc. Imagine if you got there faster, as in you already noticed you were stressed and overwhelmed and you were tense and you were jamming your keyboard slightly harder and you were getting heightened in this stage, so that when they do come in, you're on the call, you can go, just wait. Then you don't have to repair the relationship. And this is the same in leadership. If we actually recognize we're already in this heightened state and we say something we shouldn't, or we have a conversation that doesn't go well, emotional intelligence is get there faster.
What a great example, and maybe a little bit close to home as well. Like, as in, I can see myself jamming away on the keyboard. How does a leader develop emotional intelligence?
It's a really good question. And it's funny because the C in the Mesquite, so the David Caruso, who's the C in the Mesquite model, he and I have known each other for 25 years. And 25 years ago and 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 10 years ago, we would often have conversations around AI can't be developed. You either have it or you don't. And I am a firm believer you can develop it. You can develop your emotional ability. I mean, I teach it every day. I wouldn't have been in business for 25 years if I didn't strongly believe that. I believe you can enhance your ability to actually read emotions in people's faces. You can enhance your ability to pick up emotions and feel them through your body with the science of interoception. You can learn what triggers emotions and how they progress and change, and what we call cognitive empathy. You can learn to manage your emotions and regulate your emotions much better in a range of different situations. So I am a firm believer, and I always have been, you can develop it. I wouldn't have set up my business. My business was originally called Emotional Intelligence Worldwide. Anyway, David and I caught up recently. We're writing a book together, or I'm contributing to his book. And he and I were chatting, I think it was about a year ago. And I said, so David, I said, are you ever going to change your mind? And he said, no. He said, I've already changed it. I changed it a few years ago. You're absolutely right. Yes, you can develop it. I've done a complete backflip. I'm like, yay, because you can. You just need to learn. I mean, sometimes even just teaching people the primary emotions, the universal causes, can be so helpful for people, for leaders, understanding what emotions are going on behind the scenes. Because sometimes we don't always say exactly what's accurate. And I don't mean we're lying. What I mean is, if you're my leader, even if you and I have a really good relationship, let's imagine you pick up that there's something a bit off with me. You notice that I haven't been my usual self. And so you, being a good leader, you want to ask me about that. And you ask me, Sue, how are you doing? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, I noticed you've been a bit different lately. No, I'm fine. Just got a lot on my plate, blah, blah, blah. Are you sure you're okay? Yes, I'm fine. If I've got personal stuff going on, even if, maybe it's just me, but even if you and I have a good relationship, I'm not just going to blurt it out if I've got some real personal stuff happening. It might take you 2 or 3 asks before I go, actually, yes, somebody in my life has been diagnosed with this. We're dealing with a lot of stuff. And I think sometimes we think emotions is a bit of a tick box. And I've seen this on leadership programs. I used to do consulting for a leadership organization who are absolutely fabulous. And they would ask me to do, can you do a 90-minute EI session? I'm like, yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Teach people the model and the framework. They'll do their little assessment and bang, we're done. But if you think about that for a moment, people are not just going to share something because you've been taught a tick box that says, please check in with all of your team and ask them how they are. And also we will cover things up. And again, I don't mean that we're intending to lie. I mean, it is way easier if somebody is feeling scared, vulnerable, anxious to cover it up with anger. It's easier to deflect if I am feeling uncomfortable, scared, and I might get found out about something. I remember doing some work. I had about 120 clinicians in the room, and I just mentioned that, and somebody put their hand up and said, "We see this all the time. We have to give a patient a diagnosis following tests, and it's sometimes not a great diagnosis. And the emotion that we're often confronted with is anger, but what they're actually feeling is fear and vulnerability."
Yeah.
So again, if we understand that, we've got more intelligence around that, we will approach things a little bit differently.
Yeah. Jennifer Garvey Berger recently came on the podcast, and she was talking about how busyness is really a fear response, and that's our nervous system kind of reacting to like the complexity that's actually happening in the world. Do you know that, like, 'cause sometimes there can be what appears to be productive responses, like obviously if someone deflects or ghosts or whatever, some of the kind of fight, flight, or freeze responses you might see happen in people. But sometimes people also double down when things feel complex. And what's the neuroscience behind these stress responses, given the complexity of the world we live in right now?
Yeah, and I think there's often, if there is a vulnerability and there is a fear of being vulnerable, it's kind of like if you're an animal and if you show your belly, the kangaroo is going to scratch it out, so to speak. It's like we often, again, not for bad reasons, for perfectly good reasons, it's easier to deflect. I know myself. I was in a workshop once, and we were asked some questions to reflect on, and I just knew what was coming next. Talk to the person next to you and share your answers. I'm like, I don't want to share my answers. And so I just spent the entire time asking him questions. That meant that he didn't ask me anything, which means I didn't have to be vulnerable, which means I didn't have to feel uncomfortable. So to your point is, whether we double down, whether we back off, whether we deflect, there's usually a reason for it. And it comes back to basics of, threat, reward, etc. What are we being rewarded for? And sometimes we're being rewarded for more negative behaviors, but there's a reward sensation. So if you think about, if something not great is going on in your world, I don't know, there's big change in an organization. And within that change, you are feeling uncomfortable and overwhelmed and stressed because you don't know what's going to happen. Are you going to keep your job? Are you not? Is there going to be a restructure in your part of the business? Whatever it happens to be. If you're feeling all those emotions, chances are your dopamine levels in your brain are dropping, which means you're not thinking as clearly. But we want to get certainty. David Rock's scarf model is a great example there. We want to get certainty, etc. And we don't have any autonomy, and all this stuff is going on. So we're feeling all these negative emotions, these threat responses, if you like. And let's imagine then I come to you and I go, oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe what happened. I heard this. I bet they're going to do this. This is going to happen next. They did this to us last time. You agree with me. I then get a reward sensation. I get a little dopamine hit. We probably get both an oxytocin hit that we've now bonded. So we've got that nice bonding chemical. But unfortunately, what that does is it bonds us against them, whoever the them are. But it also means the next time I'm stressed and overwhelmed, the easiest thing for me to do, because I know I'm going to get rewarded for it, is come to you and whinge again. And you go, no, that happened to me too. And we're off again. So sometimes if we think about the basics of threat reward, we're often not doing negative behaviors because we intentionally be bad, but they're giving us a reward in some way. And how do we perhaps adjust that and try and get that reward response in a more effective way can be useful to understand. And again, just understanding how the brain works can be useful around that. Doesn't make us better.
It's very interesting because I think there's one of us validating so that we feel like we're right, because we have like a tendency to be right.
Of course.
But then there's also that neural pathway reinforcing that you are right because you're getting validated by this reward response that you're talking to.
Absolutely. And if I know that every time I whinge and complain, you're going to agree with me, I'm also strengthening that neural pathway, which means I'm probably going to be whinging and complaining to many other people. And again, the study that I often quote that I really love, and it's by a Polish researcher whose name, it's either Rosniewski or Probilski, I can't remember which one, but it's got lots of vowels in it. It's a beautiful series of research studies about moaning and complaining. And I often tell people about this is even listening to a recording, so the actual human isn't there, so you're only listening to a recording. If you listen to a recording of somebody complaining or moaning, in less than 7 minutes your well-being takes a hit. So imagine in an organization if people are constantly going around and this doesn't work around here, this isn't good, blah blah blah, or if that's what you're doing in your head all the time, that's having a big impact on your physical well-being. It's having an impact on your mental and your emotional well-being. So I think that's important. So if I'm going to whinge and complain, I have a rule. If I either write it in my journal so nobody else has to be on the receiving end, or if I am going to whinge and complain, I give myself a 5-minute window and then it's time to cut off.
Yeah, give yourself a timing. It's interesting. On the weekend, I did a mother and son camp, like a rites of passage thing with my son, because he's going from being a tween to a teen. And all the boys went off with the men, and then that were facilitating it. And then all the mums went into the TP, and we were sort of like this women's circle. And I was kind of reflecting afterwards on, like, because people started showing some vulnerability, but one of the questions was, what's been your journey as a mum? And like, if someone talks about my journey as a mum and they start talking about all the positive things, I will think about all the positive things. But then when people start thinking about all the bad things, then you pull out all the bad things. And it makes me reflect on, like, in workplaces, and the example you gave before of changes happening in the organization, and there could be people that are really concerned with changes to the status quo and they are whinging or complaining, and maybe they just need to vent and get some stuff off their chest. But when it becomes a bit more toxic as well, how do leaders deal with these patterns that they observe in people? We use whinging as the example, but negative behaviors that are impacting the culture within a team.
Yeah, and I think there's a few interesting things about what you've said there is we will all have a whinge and we all need to vent now and again and we all need to get that reinforcement, and that's great, but it's just how long do you want to stay there for? The other thing I think is important, going back to what you said, is you said if the group starts talking about what's good about parenting and what's not good, that's where you go. Again, there's an activity that I often do in programs where I help people understand the neural networks in your brain and how they light up. So if you think about the way your brain works, one neuron fires and then it triggers literally a connection to the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one, to create these neural networks. So to your point, if I trigger one neuron in your brain about what sucks around motherhood, your neural network of everything that sucks around motherhood is going to light up. I've literally just triggered the whole neural network around this. So in the workplace, if I start a meeting with, I want to show some empathy because everybody's struggling right now. And if I start with, as a leader, look, I appreciate things are difficult right now. Everybody's struggling. I'm struggling too, et cetera, et cetera. That's great from an empathy perspective. But you've got to be really careful, because if you spend too long in that space, all that's happening is now everybody's neural networks have been triggered about why everything sucks around here. So it's not about pretending that it's not, but this is where appreciative inquiry comes in. And I often sort of teach this about helping people sort of pull towards what you do want. So if you think about the neural networks in your brain, if I want to trigger the neural network around solutions and possibilities and future, I've got to find out how I say something that lights up that neural network, that pulls you towards what we do want. So yes, it might be that, I don't know, let's imagine I'm working with a leadership group and they're like, one of the things is this organization works in silos. As soon as somebody says that, that's the neural network that's been triggered. So my job is, how do I flip it to say, okay, when you have worked collaboratively, what does it look like? Or if you were working as you would like to work a year from now, what would you need to be doing now to have that collaborative outcome? Or what does collaborative leadership look like? So all you're doing is consistently pulling the brain towards what will it look like when it's solved. And the thing about that is you can teach that relatively quickly. I have an exercise I do when I'm doing appreciative inquiry masterclasses where I get people to work in a particular group, and they're not allowed to continue unless somebody can keep flipping it to what will it look like when it's solved, is really what I think of it as. And I remember this one group, the group were working on a particular scenario. It was in healthcare. And it was during COVID and or sort of towards the end of COVID. So lots of people had left healthcare, unfortunately still are. And they were wanting to resolve the challenge of how do we get people on board faster? Because they were recruiting people, but it was a 6-week window of being able to get them on board. So the group were working together. There was only one person from people and culture. The rest were from different areas, and they were just working on that. But their purpose was just to keep flipping their thinking. So they were having this sort of conversation, and the idea was the purpose was to keep flipping their questions if they found themselves delving into it. So here's what was really interesting is the people and culture said, we can't, it takes 6 weeks to get people on board. And somebody who had no idea about people and culture, but was practicing the art of flipping said, well, what would it look like if we could? We can't, there's no way we can. And somebody else said, well, okay, if we were able to shorten that by a week, what could that look like? No, because we have to do police checks. Police checks take 2 weeks. And so somebody said, well, what would it look like if we could still onboard somebody before the police check on a temporary? We can't do that. We have to do this. Okay. How do other people get people on board without the waiting for the 2-week police check? You can't do that. Okay. If we could try and do something where we could get people speed up the other steps of the process, or we could start the police check earlier, what would that look like? And it was really interesting. They kept trying. And it wasn't until about 20 minutes in, the people and culture person went, oh my God, I see what I'm doing. I'm going, you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it. And everybody else was, well, what would it look like if you could? And eventually they came up with some really cool solutions that shaved 2 weeks off their onboarding process, their recruitment process to get people on board. And I'm like, even if that's what you've got to, if you shave 2 weeks off, that's better than you had before. But it took literally people over and over and over again going, well, what would it look like if we could? Other companies that do this, what do they do? And keep pulling towards the neural networks. And it was really interesting. This lovely lady from People and Culture, she literally looked like she'd sort of like been hit by a tree at some point. And she was like, oh my goodness, look at what I'm doing. So it's not difficult. Again, it's simple. It's just not always easy to implement.
When I hear you say that, obviously I think about the strengths-based approach that we can take to conversations. And you notice even within teams that there's people that are more problem-focused and others that are more solution-focused as well. But also within teams, when people have history and have been there for a long time, oh, we tried that before, we can't do that. Oh, we tried that before, we can't. And they get in that real fixed mindset. And I guess it's like shifting to that growth mindset that you're saying. And what you notice that when new teams, or when new people come into a team and they've got all these fresh ideas, and then you almost have these two camps of, oh no, we can't. Oh, well, what about this and the possibilities, and how you can learn from the past to then take the steps that you need to into the future too.
Yeah, and there's often when I teach people active constructive responding, so Shelley Gable come up with this brilliant sort of framework around active constructive responding. To your point is you will often get that. So I'm new to a team, I've got a fresh new idea, and somebody says we tried that 3 years ago, it doesn't work. That may be true. But if that person really understands about the pull towards what's possible, and if they understand active constructive responding, they would potentially say, we tried that 3 years ago, it didn't work. What's different now that might mean that could be viable? Now, that's a totally different question. It may not be viable. It may still not work. But I actually had this example. It was a lady who'd been on one of our programs. And it was, I don't know, probably about 6 months or so later. And she was very much into the sort of the post-psych side of things. And she said that her company, they give them a MacGyver day once a quarter or something, basically to just figure out what they do and come up with new ideas and brainstorm. And the idea is in the morning, these small groups come together, different people from different parts of the business come together to try something new, figure it out. And then after lunch, they pitch it to the CEO and the senior leadership team. And this lady called me the day afterwards and she said, oh, I wish you could come in here and teach them some post-psych stuff. Because she said her team, they had a technical person, they had a customer service person, they were a software sort of company, like engagement survey software. They had somebody from, I think, the support services, they had somebody from sales, they had somebody from customer experience, etc. So about 5 of them. And they came up with this new idea. And this was, I think, just probably 2 years into COVID. So what would that have been? 2023, 2024, maybe. Anyway, she said they came together, they mocked up this new idea that they had. They even contacted a customer. And because they had a technical person, he mocked it up in the system and they got the customer to trial it and get feedback. And so they did all this in their morning, and then they put their pitch deck together, and they're there doing their pitch after lunch. And she said, I so wish they knew, that the leadership team knew this. She said, because I watched my team literally crumple, because the first thing the CEO said was, we tried that 5 years ago, it didn't work. And she said, all of us went. But just think about this for a moment. This was after sort of COVID, it's sort of the first few years of COVID. So things had changed a lot. If the CEO had just said, we tried that 5 years ago, it didn't work then, what's different now? There are a lot of things that were different before COVID, after COVID. Now, it might be it still doesn't work. But then what you do is you expand the person or the idea. And the thing that I love about active constructive responding, they've shown in the research that when you stay active constructive, meetings last shorter times, not longer. Because people stay on track, and you actually ask questions around, okay, that didn't work. What's different now? How are you going to make that work? How are you going to overcome these barriers? We haven't got a budget for that. Where are you going to get the money from? What's possible? And keep pulling towards what's possible, and it keeps people on track, as opposed to, that won't work. We tried that last year. This doesn't work. I think we should do this. No, we can't do that because of this. I think we should do this. We tried this. We tried this in our last company. It worked here. That's different here. And that does not work, and it makes meetings longer. So again, if people understand this and can practice it, and to your point about their neural pathways and actually learning new things, once people learn it, it gets easier for the team to do it, and the team gets much more effective. And again, brilliant work by Linda Robson. She actually worked with teams going through change, and she assessed the positive negative ratio of their communication in meetings. And the highest performing team had a ratio of 4.32 to 1 in their communication. And they outperformed the lowest performing team by something like, I don't know what she say, 1,632%. I'm not quite sure how that's possible. But it was
a big percentage.
It was a huge number, that when they stay in that sort of, and again, positive doesn't mean saying, oh, that's a wonderful idea, Claire. Oh, fabulous. Yes, pat, pat. That's actually not positive. That's what they call passive constructive. But when people can stay in the active constructive and that expanding the person or the idea, it leads to some amazing outcomes. Actually, can I give you an example? Sorry.
Yes, please.
So quite a few years ago, probably 2019, my team and I were having one of our little strategy sessions, and quite flippantly, one member of my team said, we should run all our programs in Tuscany from now on. Now, my brain wanted to roll my eyes and go, yeah, right. Because as lovely as the idea sounds, the idea of all of our clients and everybody traipsing off to Tuscany to run programs is, probably not very likely. Business would probably go down. So thankfully, I caught myself and I thought, active, constructive. And instead of rolling my eyes, I said, tell me how you see that working. And admittedly, it was probably a bit through gritted teeth, but it's like, tell me how you see that working. And what was interesting is 10 minutes later, we had a quick conversation of where, who, when, why, what, what's possible, etc. And 2 people went away and said within 2 weeks, they'll just send me back a little bit of an outline of what could be possible, but they wouldn't spend more than 2 hours on it. So that was the deal. No more than 2 hours on mapping it out, present back in 2 weeks. And if COVID hadn't happened, we would have done a program in Tuscany in 2021. We've revised it now and we're doing it in 2027. And it's already sold out. We put it out there literally beginning of May, I think, to a select group of people. We said 20 places. We had 60 applications. It's already sold out for 2027. If I'd have done what I wanted to do, which was, yeah, right, I would have written off that idea. Does that make sense? So it may not be the brilliant idea there and then, but when you expand it and you go, well, how might you see that working? Who would need to be involved? What do we need to do, etc.? Who knows what can happen?
I'm going to have to build active constructive into my coaching training, I think. Yeah. And so are there other positive psychology principles that you think are really useful for leaders right now based on what's happening contextually?
Absolutely. The strength stuff that you mentioned before, building strengths in. If you think about the way the brain works, if we go back to neuroscience, you think about how the brain works, we often hear about negativity bias and, humans are anti-change and stuff. We're not. But the brain is a prediction machine. It's designed to predict. And when it predicts accurately what's going to happen, it takes less effort, less energy, less fuel. when something goes outside of our prediction, an error, if you like, it takes more energy, more fuel. So we like things that, we predict. Same as when you send an email on your phone or whatever, the send button is always in the same place until Outlook have a update, and then they move the send button and we're like, ugh, because we've predicted incorrectly. So if you think about that from a strengths-based perspective, if you've got somebody in your team who generally does a good job, and then they make a mistake, your brain is much more likely to notice the mistake than the general good job, because the good job is what you're predicting. When you stuff up is when my brain goes, oh, what happened? If we could just focus a little bit more on the strengths-based approach, and strengths-based approach doesn't mean you only get to do what you're good at. That's sometimes what people misinterpret. But the strengths-based approach is, what is it that really, not just I'm good at, but energizes me? And how can I do that more in my role? And the research suggests if I am doing the things that are both authentic and energizing to me around 70% of the time in my role, I've got the energy to tackle the things that I'm not so good at when I need to. Now, if my role requires things that are based on my weaknesses, I'm in the wrong job for a start. But if I get to do what I'm really good at and energizes me around 70% of the time, Gallup actually found people say they're highly engaged in their workplace, and people measure engagement all the time to find that out. But one of the things that we don't always do because of how the brain works is we don't always notice the things we expect. So if I expect you to generally be awesome on your podcast, I'm like, oh, that was great. If you stuff up and you ask a question that's a bit off, I'm like, oh, that's what I notice. And it's the same in leadership. If somebody is generally doing a great job, we don't pick up on it. When they make a mistake, we do. But what would it look like if we really noticed those moments when one of your team is just, you watch them shine. They're doing what they always do, but you can see it oozing out of them that they're really loving it. And can we notice those on a more regular basis? Can we give feedback based on what really lights people up? And I know for me, I have my strengths beside me the whole time. I literally have it printed out and I look at this. And when I have to do something challenging, I remember the first time I had to make somebody redundant. And I felt really uncomfortable. I hadn't done it before. I'm like, oh, this is quite scary. I literally got my strengths out and said, okay, how can I show up as the best version of me for this conversation to make it go as well as possible? And at the time, it was courage, curiosity, and compassion. I thought, I'm going to be curious because I've never done it before. So I'm going to kind of lean into the curiosity of it. I'm going to have compassion for the other person, and courage because I'm scared of doing it. And I came out of that conversation. It went way better than I expected, and resolved and sorted. And I mean, I'm sure the person was a little bit upset, but they seemed to sort of take it really well. And I think it's because if we show up using our strengths, even the tough stuff, we can do better. And so I just think the strengths-based approach and I did an exercise, sorry, I'm rambling now, but I did an exercise. I said I was in Sydney this week. I did an exercise right at the end of the day with the group that was just a little bit different. That's a bit confronting, etc. initially, but it was kind of along the lines of send somebody a message commenting on their strengths of what's awesome about them. And people don't want to do it. They don't want to put on video to start with. They're like, oh, this is what I think you're great at. But the messages people were getting back was like, oh God, best boss ever. Oh, thank you so much. That's just made my day. And we often think it, but we don't necessarily always action it. And I think that's the key thing is, what are we putting out there? What are we commenting on about what's great about you?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's so important. And even with your team, getting them to do their strengths and sharing it with each other so people understand that, but also calling out those things. And often when I do feedback training, like especially with positive feedback, be really specific. Like people say thanks and good job and appreciation is great, but how can they be really specific? Like what about it is so good? Yeah. Just thinking about my mother and son camp that I went on, my son, they had to talk about what they're grateful for with their mums, and they wrote this really, really thoughtful card, and they took a long time and they made us a little bracelet. And most of the things that my son wrote, I was like, oh yeah, I know I do that. But then at the very end, he's like, and you always put everyone else ahead of yourself. And I was like, oh, like he's never said that before. And I've never really thought about that. And yes, I do that. But like he noticed that. And it was like really touched me, like as in, and I think we can do that with our people, but we just don't necessarily take the time to actually think or say it.
Yeah. I have a little activity I do on some of our leadership programs around a little strength spotting activity. And it's really interesting. It takes 6 minutes. Literally, that's all it does. It takes 6 minutes. But at the end of it, I had a group not long ago. I had 150 people, and we paired up the chairs all the way around the room of this lovely sort of conference centre down at south of Melbourne. And the energy in the room was amazing. But in 6 minutes, people had heard things about themselves, to your point of your son, that they hadn't realised the person had seen in them. And just to have those strengths given back to them of like, wow, this is what I see in you. You just watch the energy in the room. And that's something you can carry with you. You've obviously remembered it, obviously made a difference. That little thing that you didn't even know. But it makes a difference to people, and it doesn't take long to do. And to your point, we often want to say thank you. We often love our team and we care about our team and we want to give them pats and say yay. And sometimes we get busy and it doesn't happen. But when you get really specific, and it literally, this little exercise takes 6 minutes back and forth, and both parties come out going, oh my God, thanks. It's lovely.
There's something about talking about strengths that just energizes everyone. Like, it does lift everyone, and there's good energy with it. So probably is awesome that you're doing that day to day with people, because it probably lifts your energy too, which is great.
Oh, I love it.
I have so many more questions I want to ask you. But my final question is, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think just remember, thriving teams consist of thriving individuals. So yes, as a team, we need to come together, and there are different things to create psychological safety and how our team norms of how we work around here. Equally, as a team, we need to look after the individuals in the team. So I need to look after you, you need to look after me, etc. It comes back to what I said before, is the fact that each individual has the ability to be a great employee and a poor employee, depending on how they feel, what's going on in their world. So I suppose for me, thriving teams is look at the science of flourishing when it comes to individuals, teams, and organizations. And you'll find that as an organization, the organization will flourish if the team is flourishing, if the individual is flourishing. So, yeah, I don't know. That's probably all I've got for now.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sue. I got lots of value out of that. Thanks for coming on the Thriving Leaders podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
What a great episode with Sue Langley. I absolutely love this conversation because it's an important reminder that thriving leadership is not about being positive all the time. It's about understanding ourselves better, recognizing our patterns, and building the emotional intelligence to respond more intentionally under pressure. I particularly love the active, constructive responding, the idea that instead of shutting ideas down or defaulting to that won't work, we can ask questions like, what could this look like if it did work? Or what's possible here? As leaders, the questions we ask shape the energy, thinking, and conversations within our teams. So maybe this week, notice the conversations you're having. Notice the patterns, reactions, and questions that keep showing up, both in yourself and in your team. And ask yourself, are these conversations pulling people towards possibility, curiosity, and collaboration? Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you next time on the Thriving Leaders podcast. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.